Thank you very much. Well, there were some questions coming in all through those presentations, but just let me start with a more general question, which was, how can we listen to the silent majority? I mean, my response on Twitter was it's very hard to listen to silence unless we're doing meditating a la the first panel. But let me ask you, how do you engage with people that aren't sending you information? How do you get to talk to those people who don't really want to use social media, David?
Well, in the Rousseau system, we have the possibility to ask to people something very specific in a specific issue. So we don't have general speaking about everything, but just focused on something, so we can understand better what the people want, and we have and we can work on a specific issue. After it, every candidate and every representative has his own social profile, and then every candidate and every representative can work with the people that is involved in the issue that they follow inside the parliament, but is really different, is separating different issue.
Well, I mean, let me turn that to you, Paul. I mean, is there a gap between what we think we know about users or voters or citizens or customers and what we really know if they don't want to tell us? You can't force someone to say why they didn't like your website or...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is an enormous difference between us and the majority, partly because we work in digital, and when you do anything all the time, you become very familiar with it. There's also, I think, a huge generational gap here. And that the younger generation coming up have totally different expectations about these services. It's interesting, in the digital workplace conversation earlier, you know, everybody assumed that you had to go into the office to have social interaction. You tell my 12-year-old boy that. He doesn't want to physically meet other people. He socially interacts online. Probably because he's antisocial, but that's not the point. But, you know, we have these assumptions. So in terms of how then do we get to find out this stuff, we have to ask. We have to proactively go out there and speak to users. I think we tend to be very passive. And so what happens is, as a result, you get extremes. You get the people that absolutely love you and are motivated to come and talk to you, right? Or absolutely despise you, right? The Twitter wall behind me will be polarized opinions. Those that think I'm a complete idiot or those that think I'm amazing. You won't get the middle. So unless you go and ask people, you're never going to find out. And that's what we need to get better at as organizations. We need to have teams dedicated to talking to citizens.
Well, it's moderated, so no one will hate you on there.
Oh, right, okay. They will now. They'll find a way.
But Kate, I mean, is it a case then, as Paul says, to go out and say, why don't you like me?
Well, this is working, yeah. What I would say is that similar to what's been said here, that social media and digital communications is just one strand of what we're doing in communications. You know, so much of it is going out into our member states, is the network of people that we have around to actually translate what we do into something that is relevant to the local audience. And there are traveling exhibitions, there are events, you know, there are so many things that we do as well as the digital. The thing I like with the digital is that you can measure it, but like you say, there is that risk of vanity metrics with some of the measuring. So yeah, it's just one of the many strands.
Well then, to flip that on its head, I mean, what about just people thinking as engagement? You know, I might read something and not tick a button to like it or might not share it, but if I've read it, I mean, you can't always engage with what goes on inside voters' heads. I mean...
That's where we're going to implant a chip.
Okay.
Got it all planned out, yeah.
So, turning to you, David, I mean, from your perspective, does it all come down to what you see in the ballot box or the e-voting box at the end of the day as a way to measure what engagement you're having?
Well, I think that we can use different way to interact with people. So Obviously, we have sometimes we need to interact with someone who knows the issue that we are talking about. So in this case, we use normally the email and the social network saying what we are looking on and working on, and people can interact with them. In Rousseau is different because people is registered, so everybody knows who these people are, is all in the 5 Stars movements, and we talk about issue about this, so is a little bit different.
I mean, one of the things that's coming up on Twitter is a lot of people retweeting your idea of a collaborative approach, but there are some questions about whether there might be political barriers to this.
Yes.
Could you expand?
I mean, there's always political barriers to this kind of stuff. Changing an organisation as big as you guys is very hard. It's going to be a generational thing. Let's not kid ourselves. And it's going to take time, but that doesn't mean that all collaboration needs to be politically approved. You know, there's nothing to stop you getting up from your desk and going to sit with someone else. There's nothing to stop you sending an email. There's nothing to stop you having a little impromptu meeting. Not every collaborative effort needs to be stamped and approved and become this formal thing. Grace Hopper famously said, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. And if ever there is an organisation where that ought to apply, I think it's here. You know, we need to start becoming mavericks, because what you've got here is you've got a fundamental cultural shift going on in user behaviour. Digital is fundamentally changing how people are behaving. So as a result, the status quo is no longer fit for purpose. What you've always done as an institution is no longer fit for purpose. So this is a big change management project, right? And it's not going to be instigated from the top, so it's going to have to come from the bottom. It's going to have to be a grassroots change. And that's only going to happen if we start being brave and we start, you know, pushing the boundaries a little bit and trying new things and doing it on an informal basis. I'll give you an example very quickly. At Google, Google's design was terrible for a long time. They had big user experience problems. They were technically great, they were a technical organization, but they were rubbish at user experience. And it wasn't until their designers started ganging up together from being separated across the organization and starting to work collaboratively, informally, that eventually that got recognition higher in the organization and became official. So grassroots change can make a difference.
Well, I mean, you say the question of it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. I mean, isn't in a certain way that the antithesis of having all our elected representatives in something like the European Parliament?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. But we're not talking here about...
we're talking about democracy.
Yeah, we are, yes, and I accept that. But organisations, the EU, you know, so the European Commission, you guys, you're not organised as a democracy. Does everybody get a vote on every decision? Is that how it works? Or is actually there a hierarchy there where you're told what you can do and what you can't? Well, I'm suggesting we make the workplace a bit more democratic through a bit of anarchy. Can I ask? Can I ask a question?
Yes,
Is that? I found your presentation absolutely fascinating, and I love what you've done. But I've got a question that didn't make sense. Well, not didn't make sense, but I was confused over. If we take something like Brexit in the UK, so I voted that we stay, as much of my generation did. My parents voted to leave, right? And they said to me it was a toss-up as to which way they voted, right? And they actually didn't want to vote, because they didn't feel qualified to make that decision. Now, if I'm understanding what you're proposing, there's a lot more of unqualified people making unqualified decisions, isn't there?
Well, we are working on it because, like I told you before, in my speech, we have a section in Rousseau that is about information. So we we did all the work before. We have a section that is that is important because we just talk about something in a specific way, and so people can watch it like a video and can have an idea in the technical issue, and after it they can interact with the system and can vote or change the proposal that we put on Rousseau. For example, in the country, we every month we did a meetings, physical meeting with people, and we explain to them what we are doing in the European Parliament. We talk in a very technical way in what we are following in the committee, so we can explain the issue, and after it we can put the text of the proposal text on the internet, so they already know the issue, they can watch the text, see the text and change what they want, so we have an idea what is the thinking that they have. But we have all this section that is just to prepare people to what we are talking about.
Thanks. You're welcome.
Okay, well, one of the questions that has come up here on Twitter, which is the fundamental question, is digital democracy the right way to empower EU citizens? But before I ask you that, I'd like to actually see if we can get a general definition of what is digital democracy, because it means a hell of a lot of different things depending on who you ask. Paul, do you want to tell me what you think it means?
Oh, drag me back into it. I'm sure I've spoken too much. If I'm honest, I don't know. You know, I'm not an expert. I think it's something that we've kind of got to work out between us. I'm sure you've got a much better definition than I would do.
Kate?
Well, okay, I'll go next.
Yeah, you try.
Well, I like to go back to the fact that when the web was born at CERN, it was a public organization, it was a public entity for the public, it was free, it was open. The spirit that Tim Berners-Lee had when he developed the World Wide Web was not to make money from it, it was to make it for everyone, it was to have that openness. Since then, okay, you've got companies, you've got the big corporations that have taken the web and worked with it, but what I like to go back to is really the fundamentals at the time. I don't think it would have taken off in the way it did had it been a private entity from the beginning. That openness, that ability to make it for everyone, democratic from the beginning, is something that I really treasure, and I'm really proud to be at an organization where that spirit created something like the World Wide Web. How it's developed is another story, and I think we're still, to some extent, finding our feet in terms of, okay, we've got this ability to say whatever we want. There's a great example of imagine someone from the 1950s had been frozen and came back to life now, and you're trying to explain to them what this is, you know, that this is something, you know, I can have in my pocket, and I can find out anything I want in the world. And I mostly use it to look at pictures of cats and insult people, you know, and it's a little bit where we're at, you know, that we've got this amazing potential and we're still trying to find our feet with it.
I mean, well, you've said it's developed and become more private. Do you believe we should be taking steps back? Should we be, I don't know, legislating more for the openness of the internet? Because this is something that the EU is struggling with.
I wonder if legislation is the way to go, or whether our own personal awareness is something that's more important. For example, when we developed social media at CERN, one of the things we did was to develop guidelines for the people at CERN, and we couldn't call it a policy, we couldn't call it legislation, it had to be guidelines, because we can't control people. There's such a blurring between private and professional with social media. So, but these guidelines were things like, think before you type, you know, what you put there is going to stay public. And a lovely analogy, and I'm just stealing it from somewhere else. But it was to imagine your face on an enormous, well, like this, in fact, your face on a big screen and what you say next to it on a public road, you know, on a billboard. And are you comfortable with that? And if you are, then put it on the website, then put it on social media. And I think, you know, you can legislate as much as you want, but if people themselves don't have that kind of reality check before they type, I think that's where we need to work on, you know, our own personal attitude towards digital democracy and digital communications.
Well, David, to come back to that first question before we got a little bit sidetracked, how would you define digital democracy? I'm sure you've thought about it.
The possibility, I define it like the possibility to people to interact with the representatives and choose what they have to do inside the institution. I think that we have a new instruments that it wasn't before, we haven't before, that is the net, and we have to use it to let the people participate to our life inside the institution. I think that the time that the institution is closed inside the building is finished. Now we have to show what we are doing inside here and let the people come inside by internet, working with us. I believe in this.
Right, so, I mean, from that, I'm taking that it's a tool and we need to focus more on the people using the tool than the tool itself.
Well, it's not about a tool. I think about is a behavior that the representatives has to be. I don't think there is the tool what exactly we need. We have different tools. We have the social. We have an email, like I told you before. We can have Rousseau on another platform. It's the same. I think that we have to understand that right now people want to participate more and more to the institutional life, and so we have to find a way to talk with them. And I think internet is the good way.
Okay, well, taking that, I'm going to read to you. I've got 3 tweets in a row that actually almost make a sort of narrative, so that's quite useful. The first one says, self-selection often happens online Q&A, so one should be careful about generalizing, and this idea of self-selection is one that also comes up. Then someone is suggesting that we're focusing too much on tech and less on the human, and do we need to change that? But then, I suppose, as an inevitable follow-on from that, someone else says, how do you then manage the question of mob rule? So, you know, there's sort of 3 elements there that I think do come together, this self-selection, human nature, and mob rule. And is there a danger there? Paul?
I think the biggest barrier that we're currently, or the biggest problem we're facing with digital democracy, which is this, in my mind, summarising what you were saying, it's about accountability, it's about transparency, and it's about engagement and more actively engaging people. I think what we've seen from recent things like the American presidential election, like Brexit, is that education is a key component. I think at the moment, again, it's a generational thing. Again, there's this problem that for the majority of us, we aren't educated about how to sift and understand and interpret the information that we're being fed online. And we're not aware, for example, the majority of people are not aware that they exist in a filter bubble within when they use social media. They're getting fed their own beliefs back to them and reinforced. They're not aware that there are a lot of fake news sites out there and they're being fed misinformation in those kinds of ways. But if you look at the next generation, going back to my son and in his peers, they are very cynical about what they read online. They're very suspicious about what they're looking at. And so I think probably the biggest thing that we need to be doing is looking at education, at educating people about their rights online, the data that they're looking at, how to interpret what they're looking at, just to better understand the tools that they've suddenly been swamped with. That will naturally resolve itself in time, but we can't wait around. You know, I don't think we should be waiting a generation before we talk about implementing some of the ideas you've been talking about. That would be ridiculous. So education, in my view, is key.
Well, let's talk about the elephant in the room then, the recent US election and the accusations of fake news and that in some way Facebook was responsible for the outcome of the election. I mean, do you believe any of that? What do you think?
Well, we have had the same position in Italy with Five Stars Movement. So I think that probably there's something true. There is people that lie on the internet, but I think that if you want to be on internet, you have to be honest. You have to be transparent. In a short time, you can show what exactly you are, and so you can probably hide something for a short period. You can lie for a short period, but in the long term, I think that is not going to be a win position. So, okay, we have this problem, but I think that it's in a short period.
That's very optimistic of you.
Yeah. I am. I'm a politician.
But sometimes that short period is all you need. I mean, if you take Brexit, for example, there was a lot of misinformation on both sides, you know, and a lot of misinformation. It's a polite way of saying lies, isn't it? There were a lot of lying going on both sides, but because there was this deadline, this point when they voted, that misinformation, those lies mattered. Yeah. And so that's a much bigger issue.
But there was both. There was the true and there was the lie. So
it's who lies the best, basically, is what we're saying democracy
It's like a balance,
is.
you know. I think so. It's like a balance.
Okay. Well, I mean, let's refer to your son, who is, I don't know, but is he old enough to vote?
No, he's only 12.
So perhaps all his, you know, cynicism will have been washed away by the time he...
Yeah, no. Goes the other way, doesn't it?
Well, let me ask a little bit about then, you know, youth engagement and, you know, if we get into the habit where we only respond to a, you know, a message online, be it whatever platform, with a smiley face, a sad face, or an angry face, is that really enough to sort of train the young voters of the future with real sort of democratic engagement? Because it's not all straightforward and it's not all simple. I mean, Kate, presumably not everyone is gripped by CERN. Yeah, I love it, but...
Well, I mean, I'm trying to find parallels between the politics and particle physics. So, okay.
Me too.
A parallel that I can find is, for example, the complexity of a piece of legislation compared to the complexity of discovering the Higgs boson, for example. And we did instigate these kind of engaging debates. You know, we would get Reddit, you know, Ask Me Anythings. We would get the scientists involved. We would get them responding to questions. But like you say, with social media, there is that echo chamber aspect. You know, with Reddit, people on Reddit are techie, they are geeky, they are our perfect audience. So we are, in a sense, preaching to the converted there. I think, you know, then extrapolating back to politics, I think the struggle is, you know, how do you reach those people that are disillusioned, that are not willing to engage? And there I struggle with my particle physics.
I can help with that one.
Okay, go for it.
Because I can draw an analogy. Going back to my son yet again, he's obsessed with physics. Okay. He wants to be a physicist. He would
can
like
come to CERN if he wants.
would love to visit CERN.
We'll talk later.
Yeah, we will.
There's other people here, guys.
Oh, yeah, sorry. But he will spend hours and hours poring over anything physics related because he loves it and he's passionate about it. This assumption that young people have got a short attention span or that we're all suddenly dummies, we're not. We've not lost interest. It's just that there is so much information being thrown at us. We're much more selective about what we'll spend time looking at. And so this is an engagement issue, not an attention issue, in my opinion, or an intelligence issue. If my son, if other people, if the European Commission did as good a job as CERN at communicating with my son, he would spend time looking at the kind of stuff you do. It's just that CERN's a lot more exciting and does a better job at presenting stuff. So I think it's an engagement issue.
Well, I want to pick you up there, because is it that CERN is more exciting because particle physics is kind of cool, and, you know, legislation on inland waterways isn't? I mean, really,
yes.
There's I'm joking, but there's a genuine point there.
If you're going to pick if you're going to zoom in on something very specific like that, absolutely. But politics is exciting. Politics and democracy is an exciting thing. It's just at the moment, people aren't engaged with it. They're not engaged with it because, as you so brilliantly said, you know, they get to vote once every 4 years for someone who's only interested in their self-interest. So, of course, it's not engaging.
But I would come back to the inland waterways. I mean, I'd find ways to make that really interesting, because you could do some kind of flood simulation where people would see, oh my God, that would actually, you know, there was a presentation at the Web Summit recently about, you know, you could simulate what it looked like. People could see it in real life and get that emotional connection with, oh my God, I should care about this. And so there are, you know, I think you can find, you know, I heard there's a sewage museum here as well, somewhere in Brussels. There's a museum about sewage, and I'm thinking actually that, you know, there's ways to make that engaging as well. You know, it's something that concerns all of us. So you just need to take a topic and really look at it from every perspective and think, okay, why should I care? And then, if you can convince yourself why you should care, test it on a few others. Why should they care? And keep testing it and seeing what happens.
If I may add something, at this moment we have like half people that don't vote. So this kind of situation is probably arrived from the TV show and something like that. So I know that interact is heavy. I know that give the power to the people to vote and to talk with you is dangerous, okay? But we need to do it if we want that people participate more, because we are losing the voters, we are losing the interest of people in politics, so we have to do it. I know that there is some dangerous situation, I know that is not easy to do, but we are working on it because we believe that people have to interact with the representatives more, and they have to come back to be involved in politics.
Okay, well, let me take another tweet that's come in, which is that saying that education is essential and a changed user attitude is critical. And critical reading is essential. But this was the same that happened when print appeared in the 15th century. Paul, you're nodding vigorously.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and that's the amazing thing about technology, that, you know, the printing press, when the printing press came along, you know, it printed words on a bit of paper. That in itself is not amazing. The power of it was in the, you know, in the democratization that it provided. It caused a rapid increase in literacy rates. But probably the most profound change that the printing press brought is it seriously challenged the supremacy of the Catholic Church. Because until that point, only the priests could read the Bible, and that means that they expounded the Word of God and everybody had to agree with them, right? You know, and the printing press fundamentally changed that structure. But it caused a lot of upheaval. You know your history. You know, it caused a huge amount of upheaval in a transition point, and that is where we're at the moment. We've got this technology that's democratized us like never before, that's opened up new problems and new challenges, and we're going through this massive upheaval. But I've got no reason to believe that we won't come out of the other side of that, and I'm massively optimistic about it. And I have to say, I didn't want to come across as negative with what you were saying. I'm just highlighting some of the problems we're going to have to overcome. But we have to. You're right. You know, and I think where we try and fight technology change and we try and roll back to the past, it just never works.
Well, I mean, using your analogy, does that put Google or Facebook as the churches of today? I mean, well, you know.
You were first.
Oh, God.
Is there a sense that there's always going to be a controller? I mean, if the print media maybe were an interim after the Catholic Church?
I think this is where the foundations of the web created by CERN protect us a little bit, and where we can't allow them to that to be undermined, because everything is out there, everything is transparent, then the shortcomings of these platforms becomes obvious, and people do move. You know, it's hard to think that Facebook will ever go away, that Google will ever go away. But I remember thinking the same about Yahoo and thinking the same about MySpace. So these platforms are not invulnerable in the same way as the Catholic Church wasn't invulnerable. You know, I'm not saying they'll disappear forever, but the openness of the web helps to prevent anybody becoming too entrenched, I hope.
I hope too, yes.
Okay. Before we just wrap up, I'm going to ask a question of the audience now instead of the panelists. And we've really struggled here to try and define what is digital democracy. David got closest, I think. But so I want a yes or no question. So do you think that we can talk about these ideas and come up with good ideas, good solutions for the future without defining it? Or do we need to define what it is first before we try and find solutions to increase digital democracy? So those who think that we don't need to define what it is, we should just get on with doing, put your hands up now. Okay. And those who think we should know what we're talking about before we start doing anything.
Very biasedly asked question, if I may say so. I'm going to challenge it, if I may, just very briefly. The problem is if we all wait until we all agree on its definition, it'll be too late.
Well, there's democracy, isn't it? If we have a democratic way of defining digital democracy.
Yeah, okay.
We're going round in circles now.
Oh, all right, I'm wrong.
Okay, well, just as a final question, and everyone who put their hands up, we have a speaker's corner after this panel, so you can go and harangue each of our three individually. So what would be, it's the same question I asked at the end of the last panel. What is your wish going forward for your utopian world to see improved digital democracy or improved engagement, or what is your wish?
Am I allowed 3 words again? Is it this one?
Yes.
Open, transparent, and engaged.
Okay. David.
Engagement, for sure. So participation, that it will the most important word. I think that we need to work better on interact with people in a direct way. So every instrument go in this way is a good instrument.
And Kate.
I can only think of 2, and it's self-awareness and healthy skepticism. So I guess that's 4, but 2, if you see what I mean. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much to our panelists.
Thank you.